Okay, welcome to the first lecture for CSE204 Database Management Systems. That will be an online video lecture for the spring 2020 semester. Okay, let's begin. By the way, this video will serve as the lecture slide explanation. There will be a subsequent video that will explain an example of how to use the concepts that we explain in this lecture. You will also be able to use this information and the subsequent example for how to process your group project, the first submission of your group project. Okay, so this lecture we're going to talk about normalization. Some key points that you'll walk away from here will be why we do normalization, why it's important, and the concept of a functional dependency. It's a very important topic, functional dependency, and why it's important in a given relation or table. Okay, this particular set of lecture slides goes through the third normal form. The following lecture, Advanced Normalization, will take us beyond that, but the third normal form may sound familiar because that is the final form that your initial group project submission should take. So at the end of this set of lecture slides and at the end of the example we go through, you should be able to have all the tools that you need to do the first submission for your group project. Okay? So why do we normalize? Okay, now remember, the main thing of what we're trying to do is we're trying to make things easier on the system. We're trying to make things easier on the program to be able to get us access to our data. One thing that you're going to find out is that it might not be easy for us as humans to be able to understand different data because it's not all going to be one big spreadsheet looking thing. What it's going to be instead is a lot of different tables. All of the tables will have closely related attributes. Okay. One of the things we're going to try to minimize is redundancy. In a lot of data that you've probably looked at before, you haven't necessarily always noticed it, but there's been a lot of redundancy, at least in the way that you view it, because our human brains are much more able to kind of filter through that redundancy very quickly. But redundancy in a database system and a database management system is a big problem. Okay, and we're going to talk about why, because of one thing we'll talk about in a moment called update anomalies, but also the amount of storage space that it ends up taking. All right. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be skipping over a few slides here and there because I want to minimize the length of this video. I know that a lot of you are very busy and have other things going on, so I want to only hit the key points that are very important. Okay. So one of the things is let's look at an example. Okay. Let's look at an example where why we're trying to do is minimize data redundancy and update anomalies. All right, so here we have an example of down here with the staff branch table. This staff branch table, we would say, is not normalized, and it has some update anomalies. It has some problems, some data redundancy. Let's just look at an example. Here, branch B003, you'll notice, shows up 3 times in our table, and notice all 3 times it has the same address as we would expect. That the same branch has the same address. Well, that's a problem because what happens if somebody comes in and just for this row here changes that address value? Well, if it only changes for this one, but it doesn't change for these other 2, that means we don't have consistency in our data, right? So we want to minimize that as much as possible. So what our solution would be okay, well, what we can do is let's take the branch information and kind of break it out into its own table, a branch table, where now notice that B003 only shows up 1 time. So if somebody wants to change the address for it, they just have to do it here. And then The only thing that remains over here is just the branch number itself, the foreign key to this primary key. Okay? All right. So some of the types of update anomalies we mentioned were insert, delete, modification. If data changes, right? Data changes for a specific value but doesn't change for others, that's a problem. What if we inserted a new staff person into this table at branch B003 and gave them a completely different address? That would be a problem as well. Okay. All right. So I said one of the important topics we would talk about would be functional dependencies. Okay. So the idea here is if a column or an attribute is dependent on another column or attribute. Okay, we would represent that using this little arrow symbol. A determines B, or we would say B is functionally dependent on A. So this is A or B. A and B are both attributes that are in a relation inside of a table. Okay, the way we might represent this using a diagram, we could say like I said, a few different ways. We could say B is functionally dependent on A. A determines D. Okay, we would say sometimes I will say that A determines B because that helps us understand the meaning of these specific terms. The determinant. Okay, so A would be the determinant. It is the value. It is the column that determines the other one. Okay. All right. So B would be the determined value. Okay. Now, let's take a look at an example from our slide 7 over here, our staff and branch example. So let's go ahead and come on here. Now, what we would say is the staff number functionally determines the position value. If we know what the staff number is, we know what the position value is. Okay, but it does not go the other way. Let's take a look back at it. Okay, so if I know a staff number, it means that that's a particular person. I know what position they are. If I know a staff number for Anne, I know what position she is. Same thing with David and all these others, right? Now notice that it does not work in reverse. We cannot say the position determines staff number. Because even though, like, if I knew supervisor, oh, well, that's clearly David, supervisor, right? But what about manager? If I know that the position is manager, well who am I talking about? Is it John or is it Susan? It could be either. But if I know the staff number, then that means I know what the position value is. Now, there's some other things that we can know from the staff number. I can know the salary value. I can know the branch number. I can know their name. All these things are determined by staff number, which means that staff number would be the determinant on the side of a functional dependency for a lot of different things. Okay. We want to also determine functional dependencies that hold for all time. Now what this means is that it's ones that don't change. Okay, it's ones that are more consistent. So in our example, we might look and we say, hey, look, staff number determines name. In our example data, and staff name determines staff number. And if we look back at our example here, yeah, staff number determines name, and name determines staff number. But which one of those seems to be something that would hold true for all time? Like, as we start to add more and more data to this, which one of those seems more like a consistent, it's always going to be that way? Now, this one should be an easier one for us to understand because it's possible that at some point we may add to our database another person with the same name as someone who already exists. So we would clearly say, okay, the staff number determines name seems to be more likely to hold, whereas the staff name determining staff number seems to be something that might not hold for all time. Okay? So we're going to hold on to this one and say this one is the one that's going to hold for all time. Okay. Now, one thing that we should point out too here is these idea of a full functional dependency. Now, what that means is that sometimes we might have a functional dependency that exists where two or more columns are the determinant, are on the left side. So if we were to write this out, it would look something like, you might have an A comma B column. The combination of those two determines some C column. All right. So this would be an example of a functional dependency that might exist. Full functional dependency says that if C is determined by either A or B alone, then this is not a full functional dependency. A full functional dependency is only if there is no subset over here that this could be also true. Okay. All right. So, example, let's say, well, the combination of staff number and staff name determine branch number. That's true. That's very true. However, branch number is also dependent on just the staff number alone. We don't need this extra column. What we're trying to do is trying to minimize as much as possible. Okay? So, what we would call this is a partial dependency. Okay? You want to remember that partial dependency. That's very important for later. Okay. Let's see. There's another concept of a dependency that needs to be talked about before we start getting into our normalization process, is a transitive dependency. So what this is let's say we have a functional dependency, A determines B and B determines C. Then by the transitive property, A determines C. Okay? Now, that may seem like, well, that's not very surprising. Why is that an important thing? That's going to become important because sometimes we're going to have these dependencies exist in our table, and what we don't want is we're not going to want all three of these columns to show up in the same table together, because remember, we're trying to minimize redundancy, and a transitive dependency existing in a table promotes redundancy of data. Okay? So an example, transitive dependency, staff number determines all of these things. All right. So we could say, well, branch number is dependent on staff number, and branch address is dependent on staff number, but branch address is dependent upon branch number. Okay. So we would say that there's a transitive dependency here, that staff number determines branch number, determines branch address. Okay. Notice that in our example from slide 7, if we scroll back and look back at that one, that transitive dependency was what prompted us to create this other table in the first place. Okay. So this transitive dependency, right, we probably want to create this table. And we'll see the exact reason for that in just a moment. One thing I want to say in that is that if a transitive dependency exists across two different tables, that's not a problem. I mean, if staff number determines branch number and branch number, branch address, or in some other table, the branch table, that's a good thing. That's what we're trying to promote. That's what we're trying to get to. The problem is that if all of these columns exist in the same relation, in the same table, that promotes redundancy, that promotes update anomalies. Okay? Right. So let's talk about the process of normalization. So it's a formal technique. No, we're gonna involve a series of steps for how to normalize a database. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at our different normal forms. First thing, we're going to start with an unnormalized set of data, which is just a Excel, basically like an Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheets or whatever. And what we're going to see is we're going to start looking at our columns, and we're going to identify the functional dependencies that exist. We want a complete set of functional dependencies. So here, if we look at the example from the staff-branch relation, so here we're going to look at some of these functional dependencies, right? The staff number determines all of these other things. But also branch number determines branch address, and there seems to be a one-to-one correlation between this whole branch address and branch number. We might also notice that some other functional dependencies exist. The combination of branch number with position seems to determine salary. Okay, and since this branch number, branch address, branch number relationship seems to exist, we could also replace branch number with branch address. Okay. All right. So we're just identifying what our functional dependencies are. All right. So let's take a look at some example data that doesn't really make much sense. Okay. We're just going to have these 5 columns, A, B, C, D, and E, in a sample relation, and we're going to try to look at what some of the functional dependencies might be. Okay. So here we notice that there's a functional dependency between A and C that seems to be kind of a one-to-one thing. Every time we have an A over here, we have a Z or a Z over here. Every time we have an E over here, we always have an R over here. So there seems to be this A determines C, C determines A. B determines D. All right. Now, this is one of the things that kind of is a little bit harder for first-time students to understand this. All right. But the idea is that if I know what the value is here, I can know what the value is here. It does not mean that there isn't possible duplicates over here on this side. Okay. The problem is that sometimes we would look at this and we would say, okay, well, imagine that B was Meli Hoja, for example, and D was Murat Hoja, and F was Taner Hoja, and we might say, well, they exist in the computer engineering department, and W was the computer engineering department. I guess this should be W for Taner, but if you get the idea, right? And so what we're saying is that if I know Meli Hoja, right, it's not that I know what the set of things there is, it's that I know what department he's in, right? And over here, if I know what department I'm looking at, the computer engineering department, do I know what professor there is that I'm talking about is? And sometimes we think, well, yeah, of course I know what professors are in the computer engineering department, but that's not what the question is asking in a functional dependency. It's saying if I know this value, do I know what this value is? So if I know just computer engineering department, what professor am I talking about? We don't know for sure because there's a number of professors that could exist in the computer engineering department. But if I said, okay, I'm talking about Meli Gunay, right? Now, what department is he in? Okay, I know that, right? So then the professor determines the department. Okay, I hope that's clear. So B determines D. If it's B here, it's a W here. B here, it's a W here. If it's F here, it's an S here. Okay. Now, what we want is we want to get functional dependencies that involve, in order to do the normalization, we want to get functional dependencies that include all columns. Okay, all columns. So what does that mean? We need E in here somewhere. Okay, well, let's see. Do any single columns determine E? Well, an A here is a Q, an A here is a T. Okay, well, no dependency there. And C won't do it either because A and C are follow the same pattern. Okay, let's see. B. B here equals Q, B here equals T. No, that's not going to work either. Same thing with D. Okay. All right, well, let's see. What if we do some combination of columns? Okay, the combination of A and B, Q. Combination of E and B, P. Combination of E, A and D, T. Combination of E, D, Q. Oh, looks like we got a winner here. A and B combined gives me E. And you might say, okay, well, wait, what about A and D? Could that be an option? Well, let's take a look. A, W gives me Q, but A, W gives me T. So clearly this is not an option. A and D does not determine E, right? Because a combination of A and W gives me T here, but Q here. The same combination here cannot give me a different value for the functional dependency to exist. Okay? All right. So A and D determines E. So here we list out our functional dependencies like this. All right. Now, one of the first things that we want to do when starting our normalization process is we want to identify the primary key for a relation using functional dependencies. Now, a primary key, you guys remember, is a candidate key that we have chosen. Well, what's a candidate key? A candidate key is a minimal set of columns that identifies all of the other columns in the relation. So it's going to be unique across all the rows. Okay. So if we look at an example here, look at slide 21 for the 5 functional dependencies. Staff number determines these, branch number. Okay. It might be pretty easy to see that a good primary key for this would be staff number. Why? Staff number determines everything else. What that means is that if I know the staff number, I know all the other values in my row. Okay. So the determinants for our 5 functional dependencies, if we look at those 5, staff number, branch number, these are our 5 functional dependencies. These are our determinants: staff number, branch number, branch gist, branch number, branch address. Okay. To identify all candidate keys, we need to identify an attribute or group of attributes that uniquely identifies every tuple. So all columns are involved. Okay. Any attributes that are not part of a candidate key are going to be functionally dependent on the key. Okay. The only candidate key, and therefore the primary key, is going to be staff number. Okay. And all of the other attributes are dependent on staff number. Okay. So if we look back at our sample relation, okay, we're going to identify the primary key for our sample relation. Let's go back and look here. Okay. So what determines everything else? Well, it doesn't look like there's any functional dependency where all the columns are on this side, right? It doesn't look like there's anything like that. But you know what? There's a way we can do that. Okay, right? So the only determinant that function determines all the other attributes of the relation is this combination, right? Because what we can say is that even though C and D don't appear over here, we know that C can be part of this. Okay. Okay. We know that C can be part of this because C is determined by A, and since A is on this side, okay. Since A is on this side, C must be able to be on this side. Right? Because if A determines C, then of course the combination of A and B together is going to determine C. And then the same is true for D because of this one. If B determines D, then of course the combination of A and B are going to determine D, and then the combination of A and B determines E. So now we can see that the combination of A and B determines all other values. Okay? So let's see here. So A and B would be our one and only primary key. Okay, so I'm out of time for this video. I'm going to start up again at the next slide so that we can talk about the process of normalization, of how we become stronger and less vulnerable to update anomalies. All right, look forward to seeing you in just a moment.